Architecture of Ollama and Local Large Language Models with Per Kops.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture engineering firm that serves companies using those technologies. We build mission-critical software, rescue troubled projects, empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I'm excited to announce that my latest book is fully released and lots of people are giving me good feedback. The book is about software leadership. It's called The 5 Pillars, Leadership for Effective Custom Software. And the book is for anyone who's attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. So if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book could be for you. And teams are also doing book studies, using the study guide to facilitate team retrospectives and discussions around it. So I'm excited about that. If you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, then just send me an email and I'd be happy to get it to you. And for those of you who are in a lead architect or software leadership role, you might want to join our monthly software architect forums. They are interactive and deeply technical sessions that I really enjoy facilitating with people who are leading software teams. And also, look to our YouTube channel for the new Lead Engineer live stream. That's clearmeasure.com/YouTube. And also, we have an open position on the website, clearmeasure.com, and you can find the senior engineer job opening, and we're adding the next person to our team. So look for that. I'm excited for today's guest. His name is Per Kops, and he's an experienced software architect and developer with more than 19 years of experience in designing and developing and testing software. He's currently serving as a distinguished software developer at Delegate, which is a Microsoft partner in Denmark. He's committed to developing maintainable quality software that solves real business problems. He has a passion for building IoT solutions as well that help innovate industries and drive the digitization effort of customers. And he's also the co-founder of ATC-Net. You can find it on github.com/ATC-Net, which has a whole lot of things that we're going to talk about. So, Per, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Happy to have you. And what caught my eye, how I stumbled upon your work, was the library in ATC-Net on GitHub that extends Semantic Kernel. And I want to kind of ask you about that. But before we get into it, for the listeners who are just getting to know you for the first time, like we mentioned, you've over 19 years of experience. And if we kind of back up to tell your story, are there any turning points in your career where you just absolutely knew, one, that you wanted to be a programmer for, a long career, and then two, kind of a transition from individual programmer into architect and software leader?
Yeah, sure. I think it all started when I think it was like 13 years or something, and we got our Commodore 64, and the web started to roll. Nice. A few years later, right? And started playing around with HTML at that time, and I knew that I wanted to do something with computers since then, right? So I went on with the usual school and high school and stuff like that, military, and then I went into the university and studied my degree. And then I got my first work as an actual Java developer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was kind of horrifying the first year there doing Java. And then I actually transitioned from that into Microsoft had these old BI products like reporting services, analysis services, integration services, right? Before we got the Power BI stuff. And then I worked with that a few years with data warehousing and ADX and stuff like that. And then I the next job I got was working with Dynamics CRM and .NET, and that was where I got introduced to .NET actually. And I've loved working with that ever since. I worked with that a few years on premise at the time, and then my previous boss, which hired me, he actually got me into the consulting business with working with Azure, right? And that's like, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, and I haven't looked back ever since. And I simply love working with .NET and Azure technologies at the moment. So that's I think the pivotal moment for me was when my previous boss he got me into Azure and .NET. Yeah, so
yeah, fantastic. And so, in working as a consultant in a consulting company, what are the key things that you believe are different working in a consulting company from working within maybe a non-technologies IT department as a software developer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm part of a company called Delegate, right? And we have this concept of a boutique consultant, right? And we're also actually a part of a larger group called the Digital Neighborhood, which is like these 11 like-minded consultancy businesses, right? Where we all have this boutique mindset. We tend to go to the market and our customers, and we work from those as if we were one of those, right? And we need to behave properly and do our stuff properly as well. So I don't think it's like that different, because when we're out at a customer, we behave as if we were hired by the customer, like an employee of them, right? So we're like aligned on that step. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us about the story of ATC-Net. What happened to say, hey, we need to do this?
Yeah, of course. I think it was shortly after my previous boss, he hired me for this consultancy company, right? And then I had a chat with a coworker, and we worked at a previous company as well together. And we were like, okay, we always copy this code everywhere we go, right? And for every project and every customer, and we were like getting pretty tired of that. So I think it was back in November 2019 or something like that. So a few years ago already, we started to do some like, okay, what are we going to call this organization, right? And as you can recall, we ended up with the ATC-Net, which was short for a touch of class, and then a pun on .NET, right? So that was like the plan for the name.
So ATC is a touch of class.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then the .NET, right? Because we were working with .NET. So, but I think there was like 4 primary drivers for doing that. And of course, we had the code sharing, like we can reuse these components across all our projects and our customers. So like we're going to reduce this redundant work that we hate doing, right? Also that we improve the maintainability, that we can write the code once, and then, for instance, if one customer, we discover a bug in the code, right, we fix it once, and everybody benefits from it, right? So that was the first driver of it. Then the second driver was to heighten the code quality of our teams at the place that we're working in. So everybody like have the same coding rules that we have out in the ATC-Net repository, right? And we have an updater tool for it as well. So everybody, whenever they work on a project, they take our coding rules. So we have this consistency, and it's easier to like onboard new colleagues as well, because they just fit into the frame of how should the code look and feel, right? So that was like the second driver. Then one of the main drivers for me was like at a previous job I had, where I was actually an internal employee, right? We had some consultants from an external company, and they were doing some plugins for Dynamics CRM, right? And they had this black box DLL, and I was coming in and taking over this solution here, and I was like, okay, I need this code because otherwise I can't compile this, I can't develop on it, right? And they were like, you're not going to get it. So by taking, so our approach is like taking this prudent approach by putting all the code out in NuGet, the code that is not domain specific for the customer, right?
Yeah.
The common code that everybody does. We want to put that out here. So one, the customer can contribute to it. They can see it. They can see there's no security issues. They always have it. They can fork it themselves and do whatever direction they wanted to take for it, right? So that was the primary driver for me. That was like, we build trust by showing our code here. We don't have any like dirty laundry, right? Here's the code. You can take it. You can use it. So, and actually in some of the part of the company I'm in, we have some. We hired on a specific basis where we're like sold out for the full month, right? And we have around up until 15% of our time we can actually go and use and spend on improving our tools here. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah. And the GitHub organization looks like 32 different repositories for all kinds of stuff, from testing to REST API generating to WPF to Semantic Kernel, lots of stuff. And we'll include a link in the show notes so that the listeners can check that out. I wanted to ask you about ATC Semantic Kernel, where you have an Ollama connector, and even Microsoft, the Ollama connector that they worked on is marked experimental and it's only partly implemented. And so you're one of the first people out there to create a bridge to Ollama from the Semantic Kernel library. Tell us a little bit about that, because some of the listeners, maybe they haven't even worked with Semantic Kernel yet.
Yeah, sure. That's the short background story. So I think I started working with Semantic Kernel when it was in beta. It was around version 0.2 or something. And it was a blog post from Stephen Tope. I'm pretty sure you know him.
Yeah,
and he made a pretty nice blog post, very lengthy one, actually. And I took that one and I cloned the Semantic Kernel repo. And then I went off to like a weekend in Sweden with the family. And that was out in a forest with no internet. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make I saw there was no connector for Ollama, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to make that one. So I took my PC and I downloaded Ollama and I downloaded a local model and the Semantic Kernel repo. Then I took off and I started to develop this and actually kind of managed to actually complete the full library in that weekend in Sweden, right? And testing it out with Ollama, which is this like general purpose tool that you can install locally, or you can also host it as a container, right? Where you can download these large language model or small language model, whatever your preference is, and you can download them locally, and Ollama will expose a REST API for you, so you can actually interact with the Ollama through your .NET code, and that was what my connector actually did. So you could, you can integrate that in a .NET API, for instance, wire up the kernel for it, and start asking questions for it, right?
Nice. So you did this while you were completely disconnected from the internet. You didn't even have it available. Everything is 100% local on one machine.
Yeah, actually.
So you went deep into how this all works. What is the architecture of Ollama, and what does it look like when you're running all this locally on your computer? Like what are the different pieces that are there?
You have Ollama running as the ground layer, right? Which kind of mimics OpenAPI's interface as well, right? So, and that's where they host the models, and that's the first goal that you need to achieve. And then you have the REST API on top of it, and then you have whatever .NET package that you call into. So that's like a 3-tier architecture on that part, right?
And you said you downloaded the large language model ahead of time?
Yeah, because I knew we've been in that summer house a few times, and I know the internet was very bad. So I fired it up, and I think at that time it was the Llama 2 model I think was available. So I downloaded that one, but sadly on my PC I don't have a very beefy GPU. So like developing this and testing it out took a very long time, because it was like getting 1 or 2 words back every now and then, right? Because the PC was so slow. So
yeah,
it was agonizing.
That's a good point. Because Ollama doesn't it do a lot better with the CUDA runtime versus just a CPU runtime?
Yeah. If you have a good GPU that you can offload your model to, it will perform way better than having a standard CPU, right? Or even if you have a what's it called, NPU or LPU, whatever they call it these days in a computer, right?
Yeah. So just curious, what GPU or NPU have you acquired since?
Sadly, none.
Okay.
Whenever I do any LLM stuff, I do it on my own stationary PC, which has a good graphics card, right?
Okay. So you have that computer that has the GPU.
Yeah, but for my work PC, I still haven't gotten a new one with an NPU in it. But that whenever we tend to get like a free upgrade every 3 years, and I think I have around 1 year left before I can get a new one. So, but I'm definitely getting one with an NPU in it. So
Sure. Okay. So you're in the forest, you're completely disconnected from the internet, and a lot of developers are familiar with running SQL Server locally, where in normal team environment and in testing and production, you have SQL Server that's on shared server and then production. But for development, we run SQL Server locally, or if we're doing message queuing, we may run a message queue locally, and we can run it different pieces of infrastructure locally. How involved is it to set this up to get it to run locally, just to have your own developer environment for yourself?
It's pretty easy. As I recall, when I did it, was like 4 or 5 commands that you just actually needed to download it and get it started. So it's nothing special to or troublesome in that process. I also tested out. I think I don't know if it's a competing tool or not, but or if you know it, but it's called LM Studio. It's kind of the same where you can also browse they have like a model repository as well, and you can browse all these models and read about them and download them and read a lot about how they are produced actually. And that's a whole new world that I'm not by any means expert in, but it's quite fascinating with all these LoRa models and quantizations and choosing the right model in respects to the size that you need, and should it be a large language, should it be a small, should it be on a device, etc. Right? So there's a lot to test out, and performance versus quality of the responses, right? I think recently I started looking into the Phi model that Microsoft did. Started on Phi 2, and I think they just released Phi 4 recently. So there's a lot going on in that space, as you also mentioned.
Well, the Ollama, and I played around with Ollama Sharp. So there's independent NuGet packages to use a model that's being served with the Ollama software, and then there's Semantic Kernel. What caught your eye with Semantic Kernel? You mentioned learning about it through Stephen Tobe, but when you looked at it, what was fascinating for you rather than just using Ollama Sharp and going directly to it?
Yeah, or LangChain or whatever was available at that time. But I think it was the abstraction layer for me that was the driver for it, which later evolved into all these extensions, AI packages and stuff like that, right? But it was, I kind of fell in love with it at first sight, even though you kind of took some beatings when hopping on version 0.2 beta, right? They changed a lot going into GA with version 1.0. But I'm not sure I can actually pinpoint like why I fell in love with it, but it was the whole premise and all of the stuff. Some of the stuff they did, they pulled out eventually as well. And some of it was transitions to the agentic framework they did, and all of the handlebars planners and different planners they had in it. And I just really got to study on it and almost read all of the docs. I think it was his name, Matthew Bolanos or something. He's the PM for it. He's doing a lot of, what's it called, dev blogs on it. So
you've got some samples in the ATC Kernel repository, and a couple of the abstractions inside Semantic Kernel are the text generation service and the chat completion service. What's the difference in those abstractions. What's the reason for having two different ones? Do you know?
Not exactly, but
yeah, we're all still learning.
I guess. Yeah, and it's evolving every day, right? But at the time, I was very inspired by actually digging through the code that Stephen Tope did on Semantic Kernel repo at that time, and also learned a lot from his, like, the style of his code and how was it structured. And so I kind of leaned towards that and just tried to do it from my own learning path, right? But I actually don't know why you need both the completion and the text generation. I guess you could achieve somewhat the same with both of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we need to get the Semantic Kernel team on the podcast and kind of dive into the philosophy.
That would be fine.
Right. You've done quite a bit with testing as well, and you've got some, testing related libraries in ATC-Net. I've been asked this question by a number of people who see the large language models as chat, where you put in, a question and then you get back a paragraph or multiple paragraphs, and they ask the question, okay, well, if I'm writing code against this, what do my tests look like? Like, how do I write either a unit test or a component level integration test? Like, what does that even look like? Have you been down that journey to have formed an opinion?
No, not that much. But yeah, we do have a testing library, but it's not related to like LLM responses in any way. And I've, as you have thought about it a bit, how you should actually unit test this, because like you're not gonna get the same response every time, right? You can run it 2 times and it's not item potent. So like how should you do this, right? Just test that you get a response back that's 200 okay, or what should the response actually be like? To some extent, I guess you can like lock down the response, saying, okay, I need you to respond in JSON. It needs to be this format. You can test that you get this and this property in the JSON, but other than that, I haven't really thought much about the testing experience on it.
Yeah. Well, I think we as an industry, you'll have to figure that out, because obviously we're going to test it manually and make sure it works. So if we're going to do that, we're going to have to figure out how to automate that testing to make sure that something down the road, when we accidentally break it, we find out.
Yeah, I think we will see more in the coming years now on that part, as you mentioned, both testing and evaluation and performance, and also like the safety net around what is the model trained to answer or not, and like safety guards, right? I think that's the next step for this area.
Yeah. And there's so many concepts, and I don't think any of us at this point have used all the concepts. I'm learning about the vector stores and the embeddings generation and what that is. Do you plan to start tinkering around with those concepts?
Yeah, I did quite a bit actually. I also did, we have in our company, we have something called Code Jam, which is a session we do every, I think it's bi-weekly or something, where we, as developers, we can, if we rate up on something or done something, we can tell the other developers in our unit, right? And I did some testing at that time with Semantic Kernel and the RAG architectures, and read a lot around embeddings and vectors, and like how are these coalescing functions working, and also read related to Stephen Tope's post with the coalescing and the what's it called, the angle between the vectors, how close and similar they are, right? The different patterns you have there. So yeah, that's a great area as well.
And the libraries are popping up, and the C# interface, iVector store. But for the developers who are, I can hear them calling out, what the heck is a vector? I took a physics class. I understand magnitude and direction, but in code, what do we mean by vector in the AI space?
Yeah, so that's like, it's kind of the same, right? You have but it's quite hard to envision this multi-dimensional vector space, right? we're like used to this two-dimensional X and Y axis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you have like maybe 16,000 dimensions and arrows pointing in every direction. So I think it's kind of hard to both to envision, but also to explain actually.
So these are multi-dimensional vectors, not two-dimensional vectors.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many dimensions? Like how long is the series of points to describe a single vector?
I think you can decide for yourself. I think it comes down to like the granularity of your responses.
Mm-hmm.
How long? I think, as I recall, the longer vector you have, the more precise result you're going to get,
mm-hmm.
because you have more granularity to work with. But you can decide yourself how long a vector you wanna produce when you actually generate these embeddings using some of the for instance, Ollama or whatever you're going to use, right?
Okay. So the term embeddings, it makes me think, okay, I've got my model. Am I literally embedding new information into the model, or what's actually happening there?
Yeah. So if we take, for instance, a RAG architecture, so you have let's say you have some corporate document somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a Word document, a PDF, or whatever. You have some source or material you want to search through, right? So what you do is you get that out. You take the text. There's something called a text chunker, which you can take and take this text and break it down to paragraphs and sites, and then you can for these pages and chunks you can generate these embeddings, right? So you take a source, you generate embeddings, and you store them in a vector store. So that's where you have your source of truth. And then you come with your application. You ask your questions, like you go to ChatGPT or whatever, Mistral or R1 or whatever interface you have, right? You ask a question, and that question is also translated to vectors. Mm. And then you infuse that vector from the request into the kernel, where you also have access to. So you can register tools in, for instance, Semantic Kernel, which can look in the vector store and then take your questions and forward the request to that one, right? And then you can like infuse those together and get a response. So that's like the RAG architecture, or short for retrieval-augmented generation. So it will generate a response by actually looking at your existing data, but it's comparing the vectors towards your question, right? So
you used the term vector store. If I translate in my head some other type of database, am I thinking about it the right way?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to. I guess
in other words, it's you said it's a store, so it's a store of some type of data. It's vectors, so it's multi-point. But if it goes down, it's not just compute. I would lose data. I would have to reprocess some data in order to regenerate these vectors, right? So,
for instance, if you take your documents and you put them, for instance, in Azure AI Search, you can choose to I think there's a flag where you can say, okay, I need to vectorize this, and that will just generate a field together with your inverted index data, where you have your vectors lying in it, and then it has some interface that you can search down into, right? Yeah. So if you lose that data, then you need to go out and regenerate the embeddings.
So architecture, I'm thinking, it makes me think of a reporting database where if we lose the reporting database or the reporting database goes down, we're not sunk. We can regenerate denormalized data from our production OLTP database, but it's still something that we have to do in order to recover to get our reporting database back.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it has that similar thing where it would be disruptive to go down, but it's not immediately a disaster because you can go back to the source and regenerate this derived data.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you have the source still, right?
Well, of course. Yeah. Same thing with the reporting database.
Yeah.
And it seems like, okay, so if this is going to be this vector database, do we call it, does this vector store get queried? Does it get looked up? Is it more like a dictionary lookup? Is it more like a filtering query with a where clause of sorts?
Yeah, it is a sort of query. I actually don't know how they do it behind the scenes. Okay. That's beyond my comprehension at the moment.
So I'm guessing the vector store has performance implications because if we're looking things up all the time, then it needs to have certain performance. So yeah, in my mind, architecturally, it's making me think of another specialized type of database of sorts.
Yeah, I guess I don't actually know, but I think it's like if you have a graph database where you're going through the nodes, etc., and doing the fast searches here, right? I guess it's somewhat similar, the same they're doing with the embeddings. So I don't know how they calculate the vectors and the coalescing between them, but I think it's very efficient, actually.
Sure. Yeah. There's so many things that .NET developers can do with C# and just grabbing another library off of NuGet. But it seems like this one, yes, you have new libraries that you're using, but this one triggers the necessity for a new piece of infrastructure that needs to be part of the hosting environment that now is part of your production runtime. A new concept here.
Yeah. Do you think in a solution perspective, or?
Yeah, if I'm standing up in Azure, I've got Azure SQL, I've got App Service or Azure Container Apps, and maybe I've got an Azure Function, just different runtime piece parts. Now the question is, okay, am I running vector store just as maybe another process on App Service or in a container, or am I using an Azure vector store as an additional Azure service?
Yeah, I would definitely use an additional service, like for instance, Azure AI Search. There's tons of vector stores. I can't remember all the names at the moment, but there's a lot of different ones you can use. And the Semantic Kernel team also did a lot of work making connectors for them as well, which is in the repo. I actually also think that, so I did my connector, I think it was 1 year ago or something. Mm-hmm. And since then, I think it was a few months ago that the Semantic Kernel team actually also did like somewhat the same connector in the official repositories as well. But it wasn't present at the time that I did it. So
yeah. And you mentioned Azure AI Search. That does seem to be Microsoft's current favorite vector store, doesn't it?
Maybe not. I don't really know.
The dust hasn't settled yet.
Yeah, we've used it on a project for a customer where we tried to do some retrieval-augmented generation based on querying the data that they had to actually discover which documents were contracts and which were not, right? Mm-hmm. So we did a whole lot of crawling and uploading documents to blob storage, indexing them, getting them into the inverted index, and then doing a lot of different checks to see, okay, is this contracts or not, right? And we actually tried to use an LLM to detect that as well. Mm-hmm. So,
and it went well?
Not as good as we actually wanted. What worked for us was more of some like static word lists that we compared the content in the inverted index up against. So like, okay, is the word contract there? How many occurrences did it have? And what's it called? The BM25. I think there's like a model in Azure AI Search for how far away some words are from each other. And so you get a score out based on that. And that actually worked better for us when actually trying to detect what kind of document is this. So the LLM case, we tried it out, but it didn't really produce the results that we were expecting. So
okay. Well, hey, we're definitely on the cutting and bleeding edge on this front. Some of the dust is maybe starting to settle, like what an LLM is, but there's a whole lot of dust that's still up in the air. So
yeah, and I think also that like everybody's okay. We need RAG, we need AI, and I'm like, why? Mm-hmm. You need to have a business domain or business need before determining to use this, right? It's fine to play around with it, but like the right tool for the right task, right?
Yeah, just like every new tool, I guess it's okay, do I have a problem where I can use this new tool versus putting the tool in your tool belt so that when you come across a problem, you say, this particular tool is the best one for that problem.
Exactly. And also just to bind into the start, like as working as a consultant, right? We tend to need to go out and see, okay, what is possibly at the moment and which kind of tools do I have and what can I use when I get to this task for this customer and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. So we're always looking for the new one, whether that be Semantic Kernel, Aspire or Leans or whatever like tooling Microsoft has. I'm a .NET developer, so I'm pretty wired into the Microsoft ecosystem, right?
Right. Of course. Awesome. Well, Per, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing with us about AI and Ollama and large language models and your open source project, ATC-Net. It's fascinating. We'll include all the links in the show notes, but thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great fun.
Awesome. My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.